Episode R, Joseph Smith's Secret Handshakes, the Freemason Connection. Part 2. I originally planned on covering Freemasonry and Mormonism in one video, but as I worked through the material, I quickly realized there was far too much vital information that couldn't be left out. Even at 2/3 of the way into the last video, I saw how much I was sacrificing in terms of depth and detail. To truly do the topic justice and give viewers the insight they need, I've decided to split this into a 2-part video series. Here is part 2. I hope you enjoy. Recap. In our last video, we uncovered the deep-rooted connections between Freemasonry and the early Mormon leadership, starting with Joseph Smith Sr., his cousin John Smith, and Joseph's brother Hiram, all before the LDS Church was even founded in the late 1820s. We also exposed how John C. Bennett was unfairly scapegoated for the rise of Freemasonry in Nauvoo, when in fact he was just one of many players in this unfolding drama. We examined how Joseph Smith's initiation into Freemasonry directly influenced the architectural and symbolic evolution of the Nauvoo Temple. The ripple effects of his involvement stretched far beyond mere membership. It reshaped both the spiritual and political landscape of Nauvoo. This video delves deeper into the explosive claims Joseph Smith made about Freemasonry. We'll explore why they lost their Masonic dispensation, investigate the events leading up to Joseph's death, and confront the controversial question: did Joseph Smith cry out the Masonic plea for help before he died? Part 1. Joseph Smith's bold, baseless charges. Joseph Smith had a habit of claiming divine revelation when it suited his agenda, and Freemasonry was no exception. What makes this claim particularly outrageous is that it came right after he was freshly inducted into the Masonic order. So what exactly was this so-called revelation, and why did it conveniently emerge at this exact moment in his life? Of course, Joseph, claimed that Masonry had become corrupted over the centuries, and he would restore it to its original state. Once again, Joseph would correct what he stated was wrong. In his book, Exploring the Connection Between Mormons and Masons, Matthew B. Brown includes several statements from prominent Latter-day Saints in the early church. He writes, such quotes establish the viewpoint of some 19th century Latter-day Saints with regard to the origin of Freemasonry. The first statement comes from Joseph Smith's scribe Willard Richards, and was written by him on or very near the day when the prophet was raised to the degree of Master Mason. The statements by Heber C. Kimball, a contemporary record, and Benjamin F. Johnson, a reminiscent account, reflect the thought of Joseph Smith on the matter. Here are 5 statements concerning the matter. Fern Willard Richards, 16th of March, 1842. Masonry had its origin in the priesthood. A hint to the wise is sufficient. Sue Heber C. Kimball, 17th of June, 1842. There is a similarity of priesthood in Masonry. Brother Joseph says Masonry was taken from priesthood. 3. Benjamin F. Johnson, 1843. Joseph Smith told me Freemasonry, as at present, was the apostate endowments, as sectarian religion was the apostate religion. 4. Joseph Fielding, December 1843. The Latter-day Saint Temple ordinances are the true origin of Masonry. 5. Heber C. Kimball, 9th November 1858. The Masonry of today is received from the apostasy. They have now, and then, a thing that is correct, but we have the real thing. The message behind all of these statements is consistent. There are similarities between Freemasonry and the Latter-day Saint endowment, because Masonry is a product of apostasy or degeneration from a priesthood-based prototype. Latter-day Saints possess the authentic version. I've immersed myself in the world of Freemasonry. I've devoured dozens of books, spent over 200 hours dissecting documentaries, and even spoken with a few knowledgeable members of the craft who were willing to share their insights. I'm no stranger to the lore, the rituals, and the secrets that have captivated minds for centuries. Freemasonry's origins are shrouded in mystery and debate, with historians unable to agree on whether it dates back to the 9th century or the 1400s, or even sooner. The truth is, its origins remain murky, often buried under layers of legend and speculation. Claims of its ties to the Knights Templar make for a great story, but they are not what I am here to discuss. I'm not here to debate that. I'll focus on what we can verify. One fact we do know is that Freemasonry cannot be traced back to the time of Jesus or Solomon's Temple, no matter what Masonic lore has claimed. Even Masonic historians openly acknowledge that much of Freemasonry's history is steeped in allegory, drawn heavily from biblical stories and designed to inspire moral growth. Yet the oldest known Masonic text, the Hallowell manuscript, also known as the Regis poem, dates back to between 1390 and 1425. According to this document, Freemasonry began in Egypt with the Greek mathematician Euclid, who allegedly learned the craft from Israelites during their time in supposed bondage. But here's the problem. Solomon's Temple, where Freemasonry supposedly began with Hiram Abiff according to lore, wasn't constructed until 480 years after the Exodus. In other words, the earliest Masonic source completely contradicts later Masonic traditions. If we look to the Bible, things get even murkier. Aaron, the brother of Moses, is named as the first priest of Israel, yet the Israelites were in Egypt for 320 years before the birth of Moses and Aaron, assuming we can trust their lifespans. The Hallowell manuscript's timeline simply doesn't align with biblical accounts, exposing cracks in the idea that Freemasonry is as ancient as it claims to be. Now let's bring this back to Joseph Smith. Smith, like many others, fell into the trap of accepting the United Grand Lodge of England's narrative, which ties Freemasonry back to Hiram Abiff and Solomon's Temple. If Joseph had truly received divine revelation that Freemasonry had been corrupted and part of the priesthood, wouldn't God have revealed the full truth to him, that Freemasonry's roots stretched back far beyond Solomon's time? Yet, Joseph didn't seem to be aware of the Hallowell manuscript, and by parroting Masonic lore, he missed the mark. Smith's claims don't stand up to the facts, leaving us to question the reliability of his so-called revelation. Part 2: Freemasonry and the Temple. Shortly after Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon were raised to the third degree of Master Mason, significant changes took place in the Nauvoo Temple. What began as simple baptisms for the dead morphed into complex endowment ceremonies, where members, once initiated, were given sacred garments that bore unmistakable Masonic symbols, the square and compass. These symbols, integral to Freemasonry, were now embedded into the very fabric of LDS rituals. But Joseph didn't stop there. He went further, incorporating Masonic signs and tokens into the Nauvoo Temple ceremonies, a blatant violation of the Masonic oaths of secrecy. Freemasons swore to protect these rites under penalty of death, yet here was Joseph, openly weaving them into his new religious practices. Though no direct accusations have surfaced, it's not hard to draw the conclusion that this betrayal likely played a role in the Nauvoo Lodge losing its charter. Official explanations blamed the rapid surge in membership, but why would the Grand Lodge care about an influx of new Masons unless something deeper was at play? Remember, Hiram Smith was only worshipful master, head of his lodge. It seems far more likely that Joseph and Sidney's brazen disregard for their Masonic oaths angered the Grand Master, leading to the suspension. Joseph's appropriation of Masonic rituals wasn't just risky, it was reckless, and it may have been the real reason behind the lodge's downfall. Why has the LDS Church buried the fact that several of Joseph Smith's own family members were Freemasons? And not just them. Let's not forget that the next 4 presidents of the Church were also Masons. Yet growing up, we were fed the narrative that Freemasonry was something sinister, something to be avoided, even labeled as of the devil. So, why the blatant suppression of these connections? The answer is simple. The Church doesn't want its members digging into its Masonic roots. It wants to maintain the illusion that Freemasonry was something external, something that Joseph Smith was unfairly persecuted by, like at Carthage. The irony is glaring. The Church goes out of its way to paint Freemasonry as part of a violent mob responsible for Joseph's death, yet it quietly ignores its own deep ties to the fraternity. The hypocrisy couldn't be clearer. As we delve deeper into the Church's history, it becomes impossible to ignore how tightly woven the strands of Freemasonry and Mormonism really are, connections the Church would rather you forget. And that brings us to our next topic, how Freemasonry played into the events at Carthage. Part 3, the death of the Smith brothers and an ignored Masonic plea. Joseph Smith had used his Masonic connections to slip out of trouble more than once, like during his arrest in Dixon in June 1843. When things got tight, he flashed a Masonic sign, and suddenly his captors let him go. Not released legally, mind you, but escaped. Let's be clear on that point. Joseph wasn't freed by any due process. He leveraged his Masonic ties to break free. Fast forward to 1844, tensions were at an all-time high. After William Law published damning accusations against Joseph in the Nauvoo Expositor, Joseph responded by ordering the paper's destruction, burning the printing press to the ground. Freedom of the press was sacred, and such an attack didn't sit well with anyone, especially Governor Ford. He had had enough and ordered Joseph's arrest. But it wasn't just the destruction of the Expositor that stirred the pot. Joseph's behavior had set off a chain reaction of animosity from all sides. By this time, Joseph had made plenty of enemies. He had alienated non-Mormons, enraged former followers, and crucially, he had violated his Masonic oaths. His brazen introduction of Masonic rites into the Nauvoo temple, combined with the revelations about plural marriage, had shattered his credibility. His integrity as a Mason was in tatters. To those in the mob who were Freemasons, Joseph had become a traitor to the craft, someone who had not only broken his sacred oaths, but also tarnished the very institution that had once protected him. Was it possible that Joseph's death was not just the result of religious or political tensions, but also Masonic retribution? Had the Masonic members of the mob decided that he deserved death for his transgressions? We can't say for sure. There's no concrete evidence tying his execution directly to Freemasonry. But considering the context, Joseph's repeated violations, his reckless appropriation of Masonic rituals, and the anger it sparked, such a conclusion isn't far-fetched. When a Masonic member calls for help, all fellow craft members are supposed to heed the call and protect their fellow brother. Joseph's final plea for help, a desperate attempt to use a Masonic sign at Carthage jail, was ignored, or was it? We get a very interesting viewpoint from the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon, which is as follows. The following month, the Mormon publication, Times and Seasons, reported, "With uplifted hands, they gave such signs of distress as would have commanded the interposition and benevolence of savages or pagans. They were both Masons in good standing. Ye brethren of the mystic tie, what think ye? Where is our good master Joseph and Hiram? Is there a pagan, heathen, or savage nation on the globe that would not be moved on this great occasion, as the trees of the forest are moved by a mighty wind?" Joseph's last exclamation was, "O Lord my God." The source of the report in Times and Seasons is uncredited, and it is hard to imagine that there were any Mormon witnesses in the mob below the jailhouse window. The position of Smith's arms is inconclusive, since it would be an understandable posture of someone leaping through a window while being shot at. The expression, "O Lord my God," while not the sort of invocation to prayer common to Smith, is also understandable as the last exclamation of a mortally wounded man. And then the embroidery begins. 33 years later, John D. Lee claimed that Joseph left the door, sprang through the window, and cried out, "O Lord my God, is there no help for the widow's son?" 44 years later, Heber C. Kimball reports, Joseph, leaping the fatal window, gave the Masonic signal of distress. Whether or not Joseph Smith's last words were intended to be the Masonic grand hailing sign of distress is a question that cannot be answered. Mormon writers, intent on distancing the Church from Freemasonry, have stressed this apocryphal history, while Masonic writers have either relied on Mormon reports or stressed the irregular nature of Smith's Freemasonry. Willard Richards gives us the only first-hand account of Joseph Smith's final moments. He recounts, "Joseph attempted as the last resort to leap the same window from whence Mr. Taylor fell, when 2 balls pierced him from the door, and one entered his right breast from without, and he fell outward, exclaiming, 'O Lord, my God!' As his feet went out of the window, my head went in, the balls whistling all around. He fell on his left side a dead man. Now isn't that interesting? This is the only direct eyewitness testimony we have, and nowhere in Richard's account does he mention Joseph crying out the grand hailing sign of distress, the official Masonic plea for help. The significance of this omission can't be overstated. If Smith truly signaled for Masonic aid, wouldn't Richards, who was right there, have noted it? Instead, we're left with a very human moment. A man shot, plummeting to his death, calling out in desperation, "O Lord, my God," words any deeply religious person might shout in their final moments. The article from the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon raises some compelling points. It's entirely plausible that Joseph's arms were simply outstretched as a natural reaction to the fall. Anyone falling from such a height would instinctively extend their limbs. And "O Lord my God" seems more like the instinctive cry of a mortally wounded man rather than a deliberate Masonic signal. Joseph survived the initial fall, yet no first-hand accounts describe him attempting to complete the grand hailing sign of distress. Now, could there have been Masons in the mob? Absolutely. In fact, it's highly likely. But did they interpret Joseph's words and actions as the grand hailing sign of distress, or did they see him as a man who had betrayed his Masonic oaths? A traitor to the craft? Once again, Richards is silent on the matter. It's only decades later, through Heber C. Kimball and John D. Lee, that we get any mention of the grand hailing sign. What do you think happened? Was it an unspoken code left out of the records, or is this all part of the mythos that followed Smith after his death? The silence in Richards' account speaks volumes. The rest, that's where speculation and later retellings muddy the waters. In conclusion, the deep entanglement between Joseph Smith and Freemasonry isn't just a coincidence. It shaped his beliefs, the Nauvoo temple rituals, and even his final moments. Whether or not Joseph truly called out the Masonic plea for help before his death remains speculative, but the connections between Freemasonry and early Mormonism are undeniable. As we've seen, these ties were not only foundational but also controversial, leaving a legacy the LDS Church still grapples with today. Thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for today.